what's called the natural rate of unemployment. And they're calculating it up. Some are getting it as high as 7.5%. That means that should be normal unemployment, not too far from the official figures now. In manufacturing industry, where the likelihood that jobs will come back is very slight, unemployment's at about the level of the Great Depression. So these problems are there, and how that's going to be combined with a global warfare commitment, expanding massive global warfare commitment, that's not obvious.
You mentioned a very critical example of how the media largely fails to report on things like this. And I would like to ask you that to what extent you think the internet might change that picture for the better, but more importantly, as we just saw this great theater piece, to what extent you think art in general and theater in particular is doing a better job in reflecting critically on these things?
Well, what you just saw is a good example. How effective it is, I mean, a lot of people are putting out a lot of energy and effort into it. It hasn't been enough to turn things around. As I said, I've been through 75 conscious years, and there have been gains. You know, things have been done, but not enough to end the fact that we're in a permanent, there's a permanent state of war going on in the world. Sometimes it's not us, sometimes we're not directly involved. And so, for example, right now, probably the worst atrocities in the world are in eastern Congo, and nobody talks about that. We talk about Darfur, which is bad enough, because there you can blame it on Arabs. So, okay, that's a good topic. Eastern Congo, unfortunately, you have to blame it on Rwanda, a U.S. ally, and on multinational corporations, which are hiring the militias that are destroying the place in order so that people like us can have a coltan in our cell phones and other such things. So we don't talk about those, though maybe 5 million people have been killed there in the last couple of years. And there are things like that happening all over, and all too often we're directly involved. So has it been enough? Well, obviously not. Has it been something? Yes, it certainly has. For example, the Iraq War, horrible as it was nothing like the Vietnam War, not even close. And a large part of the reason was there's just too much internal resistance here. In the case of the Vietnam War, there was almost no internal resistance. If you think about it, there was finally a strong anti-war movement, which had an effect, but those of you who are old enough to remember will remember that it was 1967, 1968. That's after about 5 years of war. The first several years of war, no protest. In fact, when there were protests, they were broken up violently with the applause of the liberal press. So that didn't happen in Iraq, and it had some kind of an effect in keeping it down. It's commonly claimed that there's a lot of wonderment about why there's so much less protest against Iraq as compared with Vietnam. Just think back. At the time when the Vietnam War was anything like the Iraq War, there was no protest at all to speak of. Much higher protest in the case of Iraq. And it has a kind of an effect, obviously not enough of an effect, but something. So yeah, more has to be done, clearly.
In the wake of the Free Gaza flotilla and the attack on it, certainly the Israeli government and the neocons here have made the interesting twist of demonizing Turkey, who I thought the U.S. was relying upon as an ally to help them extricate themselves from Iraq. So have you any thoughts as to where that's taking us?
Well, first of all, just one slight correction. It's not the neocons here. The other day, I occasionally torture myself by listening to NPR. I was driving home. That's not the neocons, that's the other end. I was driving home, I guess it must have been Friday, and was listening to the news. And, you know, they're all things considered. They have two commentators, for those of you who listen, David Brooks on the right and E.J. Dionne on what's called the left. And that's the spectrum. And so they came up with one of the questions, I think it was Friday, was what do you think about the flotilla? And the two of them outdid each other tried to outdo each other in vociferous support for the Israeli action and how it was completely moral and justified, maybe not carried out very well, but certainly correct. If you look through op-eds, it's the same. New York Times has had a bunch of op-eds about it. Either they come from spokespeople for the Israeli government officials even, or else they're supportive of them. The United States is kind of off the global spectrum on this. I don't read the whole world press, but from what I've seen in the world press, it's very angry about this. Even the kind of mainstream business press, like the London Financial Times, but not here. And it's not the neocons. Unfortunately, it's across the board. You're quite right about the going after Turkey. I mean, the thing has been reconstructed as if, in accord with Israeli government propaganda, that the real issue is that Turkish terrorists were attacking Israel. That's kind of like what I quoted from the Israeli press about how Iran is carrying out aggression against Israel in southern Lebanon. Yeah. Or, for that matter, Vietnam. Take Vietnam. It's an interesting case. In the early 60s, when it was the liberal Democrats, Kennedy administration, the line was that the United States is facing internal aggression in South Vietnam. That was Adlai Stevenson, the liberal hero, speaking at the UN. He says, we're facing internal aggression in South Vietnam. Kennedy called it an assault from within. That's what we're facing in South Vietnam. And that's a very, it's a very typical component of imperial ideology. We own the world. So wherever we get attacked, and for Israel the same thing, and there are smaller domains, somebody's carrying out aggression against us, even if we're invading their country. And that's happening right at this moment, not just in the case of Turkey. In a much bigger case, you all know that the main foreign policy problem that the Obama administration is facing, according to the analysts and commentators, is Iran, the threat of Iran. Well, exactly what is the threat of Iran? We have an authoritative answer to that. There was just a study that came out. It's called Global Military Balance 2010. It comes out every year by the Institute of Strategic Studies. I think it's called an institute that's basically part of the U.S. government. They come out with an analysis of the global military situation. So, of course, they have a section on Iran. And they discuss the threat of Iran. What's the threat of Iran? Well, it turns out it's not a military threat. They point out that Iran has, its military expenditures are among the lowest in the region, and a minuscule fraction of U.S. expenditures. Furthermore, Iranian military doctrine, they point out, is designed to deter invasions.